Hello, class. I've missed y'all, missed being on campus and interacting with you and other students and faculty. The time in India has been really amazing, getting to see some places that I've never been before, meeting some wonderful people. Our schedule here has been pretty grueling. Um, we've already met with many different high schools and universities. I've been a part of one academic conference, an entrepreneurship educators conclave, and I'll be presenting in another conference a little bit later on. So I appreciate your prayers for health and safety as we continue to travel. And I'm praying for y'all. Let me know how I can pray for you. In the meantime, I'm thankful for Dr. Martinez helping out while I've been gone. I know you've enjoyed his taking part in the class and leading the discussions. He is a brilliant man. You have a ton to learn from him. I know I learn a lot from him each time we get to interact. So hopefully you're enjoying that. Today we jump into chapter 1 in the textbook. So we're finally getting around to the textbook. Hopefully you've read chapter 1 in preparation. Don't forget there's a quiz today, Tuesday, when this session launches, that'll be due by 3 o'clock. So be sure to take that quiz. Let's start out. There are two different PowerPoint presentations for this class session with a break in between. So we'll start out with Foundations Part 1, and then we'll move on to Foundations Part 2 after that. To start with, though, when God created the universe, He created it in a way that you and I could join in His work to cultivate it and enhance it. We see in Genesis 1:28, God said, or the scripture says, God blessed them and said to them, be fruitful and increase in number. And here's the key phrase, fill the earth and subdue it. That word subdue does mean to take charge, control, but it also means to cultivate it and to enhance it. That doesn't mean that God's creation wasn't good to start with. In fact, it was very good, but He intentionally created it in a way that it had potential for development, for cultivation. And then He created people with the capacity and the drive and even the mandate to do that very thing, to cultivate it, to subdue it. So when we create new products and services, when we start organizations or movements, we reflect God's creative character. So keep this in mind as we go through today's session. In what ways do you see this mandate reflected in the materials? So let me start off. What comes to mind when you hear the words entrepreneur and entrepreneurship? Hit pause on the PowerPoint and literally write down your thoughts. I'd like for you to think about what comes to your mind when you think about the words entrepreneur and entrepreneurship, and try to think of an example of each. Most likely, you thought about a startup company and the person or the people who started that company. In your textbook, Steve Blank defines startup as a temporary organization in search of a scalable business model. You see a couple of definitions of entrepreneurship on this slide. While some definitions specifically state that the outcome of entrepreneurial action is the start of a for-profit company, these definitions are a little bit more general. In the first, the discontinuous opportunity might be a for-profit company, but it might also be a nonprofit or even a ministry. The second is even more general, in that the opportunity could be development of a new product, service, or a process within an existing company. It could even be something as random as a new way of studying. I recently heard about a student in nursing school who was having a hard time learning from her professor. So she loaded her textbook into an AI and created a way for the AI to be her professor, helping her learn the material in a way that made sense to her. So that is being very entrepreneurial. This slide shows some traditional definitions of entrepreneurs. Again, one is more focused on starting a for-profit business, while the other is more general. The authors of your textbook suggest that this traditional view of entrepreneurship is too narrow. We should think of it not as an event, meaning starting of a business, but really as a way of thinking. So when we talk about a way of thinking, really we're talking about mindsets. And I know there's another book that we'll be looking at and some other discussions, another chapter in the book that gets deeper into this idea of an entrepreneurial mindset. But I want to touch on it here just a little bit. A mindset is a set of beliefs, attitudes, perspectives that shape the way we interpret the world around us and influence our behavior. Specifically, if we're talking about an entrepreneurial mindset, here are a couple of definitions. A way of adaptable thinking and decision making in complex, uncertain, and dynamic environments. You see there the importance of being flexible, adaptable, being able to deal with ambiguity in these really challenging contexts. The other, the ability to rapidly sense, act, and mobilize even under highly uncertain conditions. And so an entrepreneurial mindset allows you, enables you really to be creative, to be innovative, to be adaptable in challenging, difficult, complex circumstances. Another point that your authors talk about and how entrepreneurship is really more than just a process of launching a business um, is this idea of effectuation. So let me, effectuation is a little bit hard to get your hands around. So let me give you an example, and something like this comes from your book as well. When you decide to prepare a meal, how do you go about doing it? Do you go and find recipes to cook and then gather the necessary ingredients and whatever tools you need to prepare those dishes, figure out how long it's going to take you, and then do you follow the recipes step by step? Or do you just look in your kitchen and see what kind of ingredients you have and start making something as you go, adding ingredients, tweaking a little bit, making changes as you go? Well, what does that analogy have to do with entrepreneurship? The first version of that, where you look for the recipe, traditional models of entrepreneurship really reflect that process. It is process oriented. Dr. Sarasvathy introduced the idea of effectuation, which recognizes that successful startups typically don't follow the traditional process. There are too many unknowns in starting a business, and founders typically don't have all the resources they need, nor the time to come up with them. And while business plans do have some value, and we'll talk a little bit more about that in another session, because they really do, spending too much time getting the business plan just right and then using it to go out and raise capital is often a recipe for disaster. See what I did there with the recipes? Instead, founders should follow the entrepreneurial method, which you'll see in the next slide. So this slide is going to take us a little bit of time, but I want to talk through this entrepreneurial method. Start with the why. Um, why do you want to start the business? Why do you want to create the product? Why do you want to find a new way to study, or whatever the problem is you're trying to solve or the opportunity is that you're trying to pursue? You got to ask the question, why? And let me encourage you at this point to reflect back to the scripture reference we started with. How is your why linked to God's mandate to subdue creation, to cultivate it, and to join Him in His creativity? So after you examine the why, then take a look at the means at hand. Unless you're related to Elon Musk, you probably don't have all the resources you need to pursue your why. It's okay. Identify what you do have and what you have access to. The cool thing is that you don't have to own all the resources. You can find others who are going to join with you. You can borrow from friends or family or other businesses. You can barter with them, trade. Be resourceful in accessing resources. Don't wait until you have all the resources you need for the final version of what you do. After all, you don't really know what the final version is going to look like until you get there. The future is uncertain, so start with what you have and iterate over and over until you do, as Dr. Sarasvathy says, until you create that future. Next, after you've recognized or identified the means at hand, describe the idea today. What does it look like today? To get started, based on your why and on the resources you have accessible today, describe, at this point you're just thinking about it, describe your first version of what you want to create. It must fit both the why and the resources at hand. And then don't worry about the fact that it's a really small start. In the Old Testament book of Zechariah, we read, "Don't despise these small beginnings." The prophet was talking about the start of the restoration of the temple, and some people were upset that it didn't compare to the old temple. It was a very small start. But the encouragement is valid for us as well if we're obeying God in the work we're doing. Don't worry or be discouraged about starting small. In fact, start small, fail small should be your motto. You're going to make a ton of mistakes, so make them with small resource investments rather than going all in and losing it all. These first three steps really involve the thinking side of things, but at some point you got to get to the doing. In fact, this approach to entrepreneurship is more focused on the doing than on the planning. So let's take a look at those action steps. Um, First, identify your first or your next actions. These are the actions that you're going to take one step at a time. It's a continual learning process. The goal at this stage of the start is to learn, not to solve the problem outright, not to design the final version of whatever it is that you're doing. Uh, you want to focus on learning here. Depending on where you are in the process, the right next step might simply be to get feedback from people who experience the problem or can identify with the opportunity. Talking to friends and family can be good, but really it's not ideal because as you talk to them, most likely they're gonna love your idea and think it's brilliant simply because they love you. Talk to those who are potential customers, especially those that you don't necessarily know, to get their understanding of the problem as they experience it. Be aware, though, that you can't always depend on what people say. Watch what they do. Actions trump words any day. Next, enroll stakeholders. So who are these stakeholders? Well, a variety of different people. And we'll talk a little bit more about this in the next PowerPoint slides. But identify those people that are going to be along with you in this journey. That could be teammates, others, co-founders who are going to help start. It could be people that you're going to look to for funding. It could be suppliers or distributors. It could be prospective customers. Just get a sense of who the stakeholders are. But especially at this stage, let me encourage you to be picky. Adding stakeholders requires stakeholder management, which means a commitment of time and energy. It takes time and energy to communicate with and collaborate with others. Plus, you become somewhat vulnerable to these folks, hoping that they can and will follow through with what they say and what they'll do. It's okay and it is necessary to be vulnerable, but you want to be selective with who you're vulnerable with. At this stage, you're finding people who have experience, knowledge, skills, finances, and other tangible resources, but who also have a shared value system and vision. And that is really important to find those who align with your mission and your vision. Next, and finally, calculate affordable losses. You only want to commit those losses that you can lose. Let me give you an example. When my wife started our bookshop, we agreed not to tap into our retirement funds and not to take out a home equity loan against our house simply to get the business started. We started in a small space where we could learn the retail book selling industry, learn the needs and wants of our market, and establish relationships with book publishers and distributors. We knew what we could afford to lose. If after getting into the initial phases, we discovered that the opportunity really wasn't there, we could cut our losses and do something else. Um, this process seems like you just go through that loop once, but that's not really the case. You act and then you learn and then you build. In the same way that a scientist in a lab plans an experiment around something she wants to learn, an entrepreneur takes action based on something they want to learn, assessing what they learn and then building on that new knowledge. It's an iterative cycle, so you're continually experimenting and developing your product, service, process, or organization. All right, so we spent a lot of time on this last slide. We're going to stop here for you to connect with your class group, with the group in your in the class, and start developing your group's idea. Take some time this week to meet with them, preferably meeting in person. I'd say go to the coffee house, go to Chick-fil-A, go hang out somewhere, and just take some time to talk about your ideas. Use the first step in this method. Discuss, debate, even argue in a healthy way about what the issue is that you want to focus on, and especially on the why. Then post a single response in the discussion board for your group. Tell the problem or opportunity you and your group want to address with your idea and why you want to focus on that problem or opportunity. So, one post from each group. What is your idea and what is the why behind the idea? Please be sure to do that by next week, the next Tuesday, um, and I'll be back in the classroom by that time. Be sure to go on to the next PowerPoint slide deck. It has a little bit more information for this class session about the foundations of entrepreneurship.